The gods caused all this, you know. After Oriath was destroyed, I traveled, searching for answers. Everywhere I went, the same divine devastation.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, POE 1 has had many great leagues over its 11-year life cycle to date. To be precise, around 43 leagues according to the wiki. Some of these include the following, just to name a few: Delve, Affliction, Delirium, Heist, Scourge, Expedition, and Breach were all pretty good leagues and really well accepted by the community. It's also had some pretty bad leagues over the years too, i.e. Synthesis, Calandra, and the dreaded Archnem, which lost 25% of the player base, and actually Calandra was very similar to that in literally one league. But for today, we're going to talk about whether or not it's actually a good idea to bring all of these leagues back to PoE 2, or even just a significant portion of these leagues at all. Now, before we get into the crux of this video, make sure you remember to like and sub to the channel. I'll be doing more content like this moving forwards, and also live streams, build guides, all the usual stuff, but we're going to try and spread across a lot more stuff moving forwards, and also stream on Twitch quite regularly. I am working away, but we'll be getting back to normal in about a week and a bit. But anyway, let's get into the video. Now, when the topic of overwhelming complexity comes up, in particular with Path of Exile 1, this is one of the problems that makes it very new player not friendly. Now, considering the number of mechanics that PoE 1 has that does account for this problem, simply adding them all, or even many of them, to Path of Exile 2 could actually create the exact same vortexing problem all over again. Especially so early on the game's launch. Even if this was done in the first 2 years, this may actually create a real problem with new players, in particular even old players coming into the game and trying to understand the mechanic, the new leagues, as well as old league content as well. The other major issue that I see with this is that PoE 1's already been announced to be continuing irrespective of PoE 2 as its own separate project regardless moving forwards.
So, as Jonathan explained, Path of Exile 1 will continue to be its own unique game once Path of Exile 2 comes out. We will continue to update it with expansions and leagues going forward.
One would need to ask at that point, if they're going to port so many leagues over from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2, what would be the point of even having Path of Exile 1 anymore? You might as well just shut the doors and focus all your resources in one place. That being said, that might also upset a large number of the player base of Path of Exile 1, who maybe don't want to go and play Path of Exile 2 because they may not like the change in the play style. You know, we're moving away from zoom builds. And so you end up with a bit of a problem where you're over-cluttering the new game with old content, and then you're taking away the quality, and you're also just replicating the old content from the game that's already there. It seems like a double handling scenario if this was the approach. And so there definitely needs to be a fair bit of strategic thought about maybe only very specific leagues get ported over, and some leagues just get sunset into the dust, never ever to be looked at ever again in Path of Exile 2. Balancing issues are another major issue when discussing whether or not it's feasible to port all or many of the league mechanics from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2. It could actually be quite difficult to balance all or many of the mechanics in a fair and equitable way that meets the existing playstyle that's being advertised in Path of Exile 2. The other problem with porting over so much content from the previous game into PoE 2 is that it may actually start making PoE 2 feel disassociated with itself. So instead of PoE 2 continuing on the path of becoming a great game, you know, that is identified as PoE 2, it becomes some sort of Franken creation somewhere as a hybrid between Path of Exile 1 and what PoE 2 could become, and so having all this old content really make the game lose its identity over time. So where I was going to with my last sentence is lack of innovation. Simply porting over old league mechanics could result in just a lack of creativity in the new content coming into Path of Exile 2. It may actually hinder PoE 2 developing into its own game and progressing positively moving forwards. The other big concern I have with large bulk amounts of PoE 1 content being ported into PoE 2 is the game will just become watered down in quality. At some point, it'll just be too much, and it's just going to be like, you know, they're just porting the old stuff in. They're not really thinking up any new ideas. And I can see the player base sort of swinging in that direction. Definitely certain groups may feel inclined to make that comment, and they wouldn't be wrong about that. It sort of feels like if GGG just sort of went, this is the easy solution, and very much this will be something that we need to look out for moving forwards with PoE 2. Do they, if they get to a point where they're looking for a filler league, simply just remaster old content and throw that back into PoE 2? And that would be a little concerning, considering the game is supposed to be sort of developing out as its own behemoth, its own big thing, with the old game sitting in the background. So we sort of expect to see some new and really creative stuff, as opposed to seeing the old stuff reworked 10 times over. The other big issue I see with porting over a lot of the old PoE 1 content is just the use of resources. So porting over every league mechanic from PoE 1 to PoE 2 is inevitably going to take up a significant amount of development resources and potentially delaying other features or content that could enhance the game in a much more meaningful way, or could provide fixes and or quality of life for players. And so being locked up and simply trying to feed a population of players that wants to play the old content in the new game could actually, again, hinder the game in a really negative way. And this is something that we've seen with games like Diablo 4, where they drip feed the changes to content over time. XP changes were extended out for abnormal amounts of time, and some of the design decisions of the game initially on release were just bizarre, or delays in the first season coming out, or you end up with a loot reborn scenario because you didn't get that right initially, because you were so focused on getting the game out and playing nostalgia bait that you weren't actually focused on creating something unique that the players would engage with from day dot. This is yet another risk I see with trying to port too much content over from Path of Exile 1. It'll actually hinder the game later down the track, and or even closer to release, depending on the production cycle of PoE 1 content to get reported over in the first place. The other big thing that exists around a lot of older PoE 1 content comes back to player feedback as well. Not every mechanic in the game, even good mechanics in the game, has been well received by the player base in totality. There were really good leagues that there was stiff criticism of a 50-50 bias either side of. A great example is Affliction League with Magic Find. I, for one, am not a big fan of Magic Find. There are many players that really love Magic Find. And so this is some of the divisive conversation that's existed over the years with Path of Exile 1 content. Another great example is Harvest League. A lot of players didn't necessarily like the harvest mechanic, but then a large number of players also enjoyed it and enjoyed the outcomes of it. And it really played to the element of crafters. Now, would that be a good mechanic to put in PoE 2? I'm unsure at this stage. The final point I'll make is I really just want to see new content in Path of Exile 2. Like, I do want to see a few things from the PoE 1 game. Like, I definitely have made it clear I would love to see Delve, but I don't necessarily want to see Delve in exactly the same way that it came out in PoE 1. Delve, while I consider in PoE 1 as a perfect mechanic, with its flaws, obviously, I don't necessarily think it's the perfect mechanic to be ported over into another game tit for tat. I think there's a lot of things that could be done to make it really cool and engaging, and maybe, it could be an archive repository for other content and you relegate that to Delve. Maybe that's a solution. I'm unsure. It's a cool idea, but how much time and resources would that take? Is it worth it? And is it worth compromising other potentially new and greater content that could come out in Path of Exile 2? We won't know until Path of Exile 2 comes out in beta and then in launch, but I think I would like to see the ability for GGG to simply have the freedom to create completely unique content without being sort of gated by the community to have this constant itching demand to push old content into a brand new game, when if you really want to play it, you could just go back to PoE 1, load up PoE 1 and play PoE 1 if you wanted to play that specific type of game content anyway. So based on all of the above points raised, I think while it would be cool to see old PoE 1 content make its way into PoE 2, I think there should be a limit as to what is ported into PoE 2. I don't believe that every bit of content from even existing in PoE 1 should be ported into PoE 2. I think it should be very selective, And I think, and this is what they've alluded to in all the interviews and all the conversations that have been had so far with the developers, is that I do agree with the standpoint that the old content should be very heavily re-engineered and tooled so that it fits in with the new game content. I think just reworking it, reskinning it, remastering it would do PoE 2 a disservice, and it would take away the fun of looking forward to all new leagues and creative avenues that we could see come out in the game. And I'm excited to see what comes out into the future and how long PoE 2 lasts. Will it get another 11 years or 12 years, or will it peter out after 6 and we all end up back in PoE 1, or will it only get 12 months and then we all go back to PoE 1 because it's a better game? Who knows? Like, that's something that the game needs time to develop in. But if we're so focused on pushing old content back into a new game to feed a nostalgic itch, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it sort of just feels like a lost opportunity if that was the direction that was taken. Anyway, whether you disagree or agree with some of the points that I discussed in here, it's definitely a really interesting conversation, and we don't really know what the answers are at this stage and what to look forward to. But, we can only speculate, and that's half the fun at this point. Anyway, until next time, or until I'm streaming, which will probably be later tonight, have a good one, and I'll see you all later.